The night the divorce papers arrived, my world shattered, but it didn't end there. I sat alone in the dimly lit room, the cold ink of his signature burning into my soul, a cruel testament to the life he had stripped away from me. Every breath felt heavy, as if the air itself mourned with me, yet beneath the crushing weight of despair, a spark ignited, one that would soon become an unquenchable fire. He had left me for another woman, a naive girl who had no idea of the storm she was walking into, and yet, in his arrogance, he thought he had won. He had no idea what he had unleashed. For years, he had ruled our lives with an iron fist, punishing both of us with cruelty that had no bounds. His second wife suffered silently under the same tyranny, trapped by fear and forced smiles. I remembered the bruises, the threats, the way he manipulated and destroyed confidence, leaving nothing but fear and submission in his wake. But as I stared into the darkness of that room, a chilling clarity settled over me. I wasn't just a broken woman anymore. I was the architect of what was to come. My grief would become my weapon, my sorrow a calculated strategy, and my silence the calm before a storm no one could predict. I picked up my phone with trembling hands, my fingers hovering over the screen. For the first time, I sought out the other woman, the girl now trapped under his deceit, and sent her a message that would change both our fates. I am the one he left behind. You are the one he intends to destroy. If you are willing, we can end him together. My pulse raced as I pressed send, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through me. Minutes stretched into an eternity before a reply came. I'm scared, but I trust you. Let's do this. That single line ignited something fierce within me. Two women, oppressed, underestimated, and betrayed, now standing together with a singular purpose. The idea of revenge no longer terrified me. It empowered me. His arrogance, his cruelty, his twisted sense of control had blinded him to a fundamental truth. He had underestimated the strength of the women he thought he could break. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I felt a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. The divorce papers, which he had thought marked the end of me, were now symbols of my liberation. The pain that had once paralyzed me became fuel for my strategy. I remembered every slight, every insult, every calculated manipulation he had used to dominate us. And I vowed, silently but fiercely, that his reign of terror would end. We would not seek to destroy his life through mere vengeance. Our mission was far more potent. We would expose him, dismantle his facade, and reclaim the dignity he had stolen from us both. I could feel my heart pounding, the rhythm of it syncing with the plan forming in my mind. This was not impulsive rage. It was methodical, precise, and inevitable. I thought of him sleeping soundly, oblivious to the storm gathering beyond his doorstep. He would wake one day to find the carefully constructed walls of his control crumbling, and behind those walls, two women who refused to remain victims. The weight of betrayal had transformed into clarity, and clarity into action. Every step I would take, every calculated move, would be guided by the memory of every time he had dismissed me, mocked me, and tried to erase my existence. I would not forget, and I would not forgive in the way he imagined. This was a reckoning long overdue. The cold air brushing against my face as I opened the window felt like an omen, a whisper from the universe confirming my resolve. I was no longer fragile, no longer silent. The first move had been made, the alliance formed. Two women, each a victim of his cruelty, now united with one goal, to dismantle the life he had built on lies and fear. I felt the first taste of power, and it was intoxicating. The darkness of the night no longer suffocated me. It had gifted me focus. I would act with precision, ensuring that his arrogance would be the instrument of his downfall. There would be no mercy, but also no unnecessary cruelty. This was justice, calculated and inevitable, and the world would see him for what he truly was, a man who had underestimated the strength of those he thought he could control. I stood there, gazing at the horizon as the first hints of morning light touched the city skyline. The night had tested me, broken me, yet in breaking me, it had given me clarity. This was not merely about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was stolen. It was about proving that cruelty, no matter how deeply rooted, could be met with resilience, intelligence, and unyielding determination. I inhaled deeply, the cool morning air filling my lungs with resolve. Today was the beginning. The beginning of a plan that would leave him unable to deny the consequences of his actions. He believed he had control, but control was an illusion. easily shattered when confronted by the unwavering will of those he had wronged. For the first time since the divorce, I smiled, not the forced smile of a woman pretending to be fine, but the quiet, chilling smile of someone who knows exactly how to turn pain into power. He would soon understand that leaving me, underestimating me, and enslaving another woman with his tyranny had been his gravest mistake. 2 women, 2 lives intertwined by his cruelty, now standing together, unstoppable. His downfall would be precise, unrelenting, and deserved. And when the day came, the world would witness not the brokenness he believed he had inflicted, but the strength, cunning, and resilience he had never anticipated. The night had ended, the papers lay on the table like trophies of betrayal, and yet the real game had just begun. Every memory, every insult, every act of dominance he had displayed over us would be repaid tenfold, not in mindless rage, but in calculated, inevitable justice. And as the sun rose, painting the room in a pale gold, I felt the truth settle deep within me. I was no longer a victim. I was a force, a reckoning waiting to happen, and his arrogance would be the spark that ignited it all. Do not mistake my quiet for weakness. Do not mistake my past tears for surrender. The time for reckoning had arrived, and it would be flawless. The morning light did little to soften the intensity of my resolve. The city stirred outside, oblivious to the storm brewing within my small apartment, but inside the air crackled with anticipation. I had contacted her, the girl who had unwittingly stepped into his world of cruelty, and in our brief exchange, a silent pact had been forged. There was fear in her words, but also trust, fragile yet tangible. I could sense the tremor in her fingertips as she typed, her hesitancy palpable, yet her courage flickered, like a candle in the wind refusing to die. This was the beginning of a meticulously orchestrated plan, one that required patience, cunning, and a willingness to delve into shadows both our lives had never known. Every move needed precision, every step calculated to corner him in ways he would never foresee. He had always thrived on arrogance, on the illusion that control was his birthright. That arrogance was his undoing. I started by revisiting memories I had buried, memories of manipulation and abuse, of gaslighting and betrayal. The more I recalled, the clearer my strategy became. He believed in dominance through fear, yet fear, I realized, could be weaponized. Not by confrontation, not by brute force, but through intelligence and psychological leverage. Every insult he had hurled, every lie he had spun, every mask he had worn for the world could now be turned against him. I would not merely expose him. I would dismantle his carefully constructed empire of deceit. Our alliance was no longer just about survival. It had evolved into a mission of exacting justice with surgical precision. The first step was surveillance. I observed patterns in his daily life, the predictable arrogance with which he navigated the world. He believed in routine, in the illusion that women, particularly his wives, were powerless pawns. Little did he know, those pawns were plotting the ultimate checkmate. I studied his movements, his preferences, even the subtle micro-expressions that betrayed his confidence. Every detail was a thread I could pull to unravel his life. Meanwhile, the other woman, the girl he thought he controlled, became my eyes and ears within his domain. Her fear was her armor, but she learned quickly. Under guidance, she transformed from a victim into a vigilant observer, reporting small shifts, tiny cracks in his facade. Together, we became the unseen, the unpredictable, the phantom he could neither anticipate nor counter. We communicated through encrypted channels, coded messages that would seem innocuous to any observer, but carried entire strategies within them. Her words were brief, precise, yet laced with urgency. Each message painted a fragment of the larger picture, allowing me to plan several steps ahead. I could feel the adrenaline pulse through me as I coordinated our next moves, a dangerous dance in which a single misstep could alert him. And yet, this precarious balance, this tightrope walk between fear and action, only sharpened my focus. Every calculated risk, every sleepless hour, was a brick laid in the foundation of his inevitable downfall. At night, I traced the contours of my own pain, the years he had stolen from me, and allowed it to morph into something far more potent. Anger alone was insufficient. I needed strategy, patience, and subtlety. I crafted scenarios in my mind, imagining the collapse of his ego, the shock that would register when he realized the women he had demeaned and dominated were orchestrating his ruin from within the very life he thought he owned. I rehearsed the moves meticulously, conversations intercepted, moments exposed, secrets weaponized. Each plan was a thread in a web that, once completed, would entangle him completely. His reputation, his comfort, the control he cherished, all would be rendered meaningless before the precision of two minds honed by betrayal and resilience. Her confidence grew with every success, every small intelligence she delivered from within his household. She started speaking with a boldness that surprised even me. Fear was still there, but it had morphed into determination. And I recognized in her the same hunger that had taken root in me that fateful night with the divorce papers. The hunger for justice, for restitution, for exposure of a man who believed his cruelty was untouchable. Our bond deepened, silent but unbreakable, each message, each strategy session fortifying a connection born out of shared trauma. We were no longer two isolated victims. We were a unit, each action interdependent, each success a testament to our combined strength. I began exploiting his weaknesses systematically. He underestimated the women he thought fragile, and that underestimation was the key to his undoing. I fed him illusions of ignorance, pretending to remain broken and powerless, while every interaction, every subtle observation, laid the groundwork for exposure. I manipulated conversations, planting seeds of doubt and curiosity that would lead him exactly where we wanted. He believed in predictability, yet every calculated deviation, every small act of resistance we orchestrated, began to fracture his certainty. Meanwhile, the other woman, guided by my foresight, learned to anticipate his manipulations, to redirect his control attempts into traps of our design. The psychological tension built like a taut wire, and I thrived on it. Each day brought new insights, new strategies, and a growing confidence that our plan was not only feasible but inevitable. I had become both predator and strategist, my grief transformed into a weapon far more lethal than anger alone. We were not acting recklessly. We were precise, measured, and methodical. Every detail, no matter how small, was accounted for, every potential escape route considered. He was walking blind into a labyrinth constructed from his own arrogance, and neither he nor anyone else could foresee the magnitude of what we had set in motion. And as the nights drew longer and darker, my resolve solidified. He would soon realize, when the first domino fell, that the consequences of his cruelty were inescapable. Every slight, every betrayal, every moment of contempt he had cast upon us would converge in a reckoning so exacting that his world would shatter with the inevitability of justice itself. The bond between us, two women forged by shared torment and bound by the promise of retaliation, was unbreakable, unyielding, and utterly unstoppable. The morning approached again, indifferent to the storm that we were engineering in the shadows. Yet in that quiet pre-dawn hour, I felt the surge of empowerment, the intoxicating knowledge that the game had begun. The first moves were made, subtle yet irreversible, and the wheels of retribution turned silently but decisively. He believed he was untouchable. He believed he had control. That illusion would be obliterated. And as the sun slowly lit the horizon, I understood the truth that now governed my existence. His fall was not just inevitable. It was meticulously, inescapably, ours to command. The days that followed were a careful dance of shadows and whispers. Every interaction with him became a calculated performance, a subtle tug at the threads of his arrogance. He walked through life blind to the storm gathering in the quiet corners he had long dismissed, convinced that his dominion over two women was absolute. Yet with every phone call, every seemingly innocuous message exchanged between us, the other woman and I inched closer to our goal. Her observations from within his house were invaluable. She noted his routines. The flicker of impatience when confronted with minor inconveniences, the micro gestures revealing the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Each detail was meticulously logged, each insight transformed into a tactical advantage. We were no longer mere victims. We were strategists, our emotions tempered into tools for dismantling his life piece by piece. I remembered the nights I had spent staring at the ceiling, letting the memories of abuse and betrayal settle into the deepest recesses of my mind. The fear that had once threatened to consume me had now solidified into a methodical determination. Every insult, every lie, every act of cruelty became a calculated lesson in understanding him, in predicting his moves, in exploiting his weaknesses. He believed himself clever, but cleverness is impotent against preparation and insight. We observed, waited, and planned, knowing that his undoing would not come from overt aggression, but from a quiet, inevitable unraveling orchestrated by those he had underestimated most. Late evenings were spent exchanging strategies, each message carefully coded, dense with meaning yet disguised as mundane conversation. We trained our focus on the psychological battlefield, probing for vulnerabilities in his ego and his relationships. The other woman, initially trembling with fear, began to grow in confidence, guided by my instructions and the knowledge that her silent suffering was about to be transformed into a formidable weapon. She became more assertive, more aware. Each report she sent me a puzzle piece in the mosaic of his eventual downfall. We developed a language of subtle signals, a lexicon that allowed us to act in synchrony even when physically apart. Through this collaboration, fear became agency, and power began to shift inexorably into our hands. Every day revealed new angles, new weaknesses to exploit. He still treated us with the contempt of one who assumes dominance without consequence, a fatal error that would soon cost him everything. I started planting seeds of doubt in his mind through calculated interactions, letting him believe I remained broken, fragile, and malleable. But beneath the surface, I was calculating, anticipating, ready to turn his confidence into his trap. Every smile, every passive gesture, every feigned submission was part of a broader strategy designed to lead him into situations where his arrogance would blind him to the imminent threat. Our approach was surgical. There was no room for error, no margin for impulsivity. This was not vengeance for the sake of rage, but precise, deliberate justice. The psychological tension built relentlessly, a tight coil that threatened to snap at any misstep. Yet within this pressure, I found clarity and strength. Each day, I reviewed our progress, noted the subtle shifts in his behavior, the micro fractures forming in his relationships with others, and refined our approach accordingly. We were relentless, and the meticulous nature of our planning began to instill an undercurrent of unease in him, though he had no idea why. Even his casual confidences were monitored, his arrogance manipulated to provoke predictable reactions that fed into the larger strategy. We transformed his own sense of control into the architecture of his impending collapse. Nightfall brought reflection and renewed focus. I allowed myself brief moments to feel the weight of my pain, the years of humiliation and suffering, but never long enough to weaken resolve. Instead, I translated that emotion into an almost clinical calculation of risk, timing, and leverage. We were preparing to strike at the moments when he would least expect it, using his own flaws and habits against him. Each minor success, the information gained, the subtle hesitation observed, the growing confidence in my partner, reinforced the inevitability of his downfall. There was no turning back. The machinery of retribution had begun, its gears silently grinding toward inevitability. The other woman's transformation was remarkable. Once hesitant, fearful, and uncertain, she had become alert, cunning, and resourceful. Our bond deepened not through sentiment, but through shared purpose, each act reinforcing trust and synchrony. We developed a rhythm in which every observation, every report, every insight from her became a direct contribution to the web we were weaving. Together, our combined intelligence and patience outstripped any expectation he might have had of control or foresight. He believed in dominance built on fear. We proved that resilience, intellect, and strategic planning could turn fear into weaponized force. I began rehearsing potential scenarios in my mind, predicting his reactions, and planning contingencies for each possible outcome. There was no room for miscalculation. Every step was designed to manipulate, to expose, and to dismantle. The precision of our approach contrasted starkly with his chaotic aggression, and I could already sense the beginning tremors of doubt forming in his mind. He remained unaware, yet subconsciously, he was responding to the subtle pressures we were applying. Every calculated step, every nuanced psychological maneuver, brought us closer to the apex of the plan. By the time the second week of our coordination ended, our influence over the situation had grown undeniable. We were no longer merely responding to his tyranny. We were shaping his reality, subtly but irrevocably, ensuring that his next misstep would be both predictable and catastrophic. The alliance between the two of us had become a formidable force, grounded in shared trauma yet elevated by cunning and strategic acumen. And as the nights grew longer, the tension more palpable, I felt the intoxicating clarity of power that had once been denied, yet now flowed through every calculated action, every silent observation, every plan executed with precision. The reckoning would not be sudden, nor chaotic. It would be precise, inescapable, and devastating. The days became a relentless rhythm of observation, calculation, and silent communication. Amira and I had settled into a pattern, our movements choreographed with precision, each step executed with the knowledge that discovery could mean disaster. Every gesture he made, every careless word, every hint of arrogance was meticulously logged and analyzed. We had become experts in reading him, predicting his reactions, and manipulating circumstances so that he remained oblivious to the web being woven around him. It was intoxicating to witness the power of foresight, to feel the creeping certainty that every carefully measured action brought us closer to his unraveling. No longer merely victims of his cruelty, we were architects of a fate he could neither imagine nor escape. Nightfall provided the cover we needed to orchestrate our maneuvers. Amira, now transformed from timid victim to vigilant participant, moved through the house with a quiet grace, observing, nodding and reporting every detail that could be exploited. Her fear had not vanished entirely, but it had hardened into focus, an almost surgical precision in her attention to his routines and vulnerabilities. I guided her through subtle shifts in timing and positioning, ensuring that each observation was both useful and safe. Together, we turned his arrogance into a liability, each predictable action mapped and repurposed against him. Our alliance, forged in shared suffering, became a force neither of us could have anticipated in its potency. I spent hours reviewing the documents we had retrieved, memorizing details, creating contingency plans, and rehearsing potential scenarios in my mind. The revelations within those papers were staggering, evidence of financial fraud, manipulation, and deceit that reached far beyond the confines of our personal suffering. Each page fortified my resolve, reminding me that our objective was not simply personal revenge, but the restoration of justice, a reclamation of dignity stolen over years of oppression. Amira's eyes, wide and attentive, mirrored the growing confidence that every calculated step we took was eroding the very foundation of his sense of invincibility. Communication between us had evolved into a seamless exchange of coded signals, short messages, and discreet movements. He remained blissfully unaware, convinced of our ignorance, while we coordinated every action with meticulous care. Each success, no matter how small, a minor hesitation observed, a flaw detected in his routine, was celebrated silently, strengthening our resolve and tightening the threads of his eventual downfall. His ignorance was our greatest asset, a tool we wielded with precision, turning his confidence into a trap from which he would be unable to escape. One evening, I observed him from a distance as he interacted with friends and colleagues. His charm, the carefully constructed mask of control and authority, was flawless in appearance but brittle underneath. I noted every micro-expression, the flicker of impatience, the subtle indications of insecurity he could not suppress. These small cracks, imperceptible to the casual observer, were the points where we would strike. I relayed every observation to Amira, who nodded, her body tense but her mind sharp, ready to act when the time came. The anticipation between us grew, a silent pulse that quickened with each passing hour, reminding us that the moment of confrontation was approaching with inevitable certainty. We began to exploit his weaknesses strategically. The documents were positioned as both a threat and leverage. We planted subtle suggestions, knowing he would act predictably, exposing his arrogance and underestimating our capabilities. Every encounter, every carefully measured interaction, was designed to destabilize him psychologically, to erode the confidence he had built over years of domination. Our plan was a game of patience and intellect, where timing and subtlety were paramount, and the smallest miscalculation could yield disastrous consequences. Yet with every passing day, our precision increased, and his impending collapse seemed more certain. The psychological tension between us and him intensified. Each day, I felt the weight of our strategy pressing against the boundaries of normalcy. We had become shadows, observing, waiting, calculating. His every step was monitored, every routine analyzed, and every gesture repurposed in our favor. The thrill of control, once reserved for him, now flowed through our coordinated actions. Amira's transformation was complete. She moved from fear to focused agency, and I drew strength from the reflection of determination in her eyes. Together, we became the embodiment of resilience and calculated retribution. Late at night, as the house settled into silence, I would rehearse scenarios, visualizing his reactions, planning contingencies, and refining strategies. There was no room for hesitation or error. Each decision was deliberate, each observation critical, each action a step closer to the inevitable reckoning. We were patient, methodical, and unrelenting, the anticipation building like a storm gathering strength. And in the quiet of those nights, I felt the intoxicating power of impending justice, the certainty that the arrogance which had once oppressed us would now become the instrument of his ruin. I woke before dawn, the house steeped in that peculiar hush that arrives just before a storm. For days now, a tangible tension had woven itself into every corridor and corner, coiling around us like an invisible wire pulled tighter with each breath he took. Amira sensed it too. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now burned with a quiet intelligence as though she had stepped beyond the boundaries of who she used to be. Together, we had crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed, and that realization carried both a peculiar comfort and a dangerous thrill. Revenge was no longer a distant possibility. It was a structure rising brick by brick, supported by our observations, our silence, and the certainty that his cruelty had finally met an opposition capable of dismantling him from within. Every morning, I watched him leave the house with the same swaggering confidence, unaware that his world was shifting beneath him. His arrogance was a constant, a shield he polished daily, oblivious to the fractures spidering across its surface. I documented his routines meticulously, noting the exact minute he locked the door, the way his voice changed when he lied on the phone, the growing impatience that creased his brow whenever reality contradicted the narrative he wanted to impose. Amira gathered her own observations, tiny details he believed too insignificant to hide. Together, our notes formed a map of his vulnerabilities, a blueprint for his ruin that grew more detailed with every passing hour. Yet even as we planned with precision, a subtle uncertainty stalked my thoughts. Revenge, however righteous, was a fire capable of consuming more than its intended target. I found myself awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether the darkness gathering around us would eventually seep into my own bones. But each time doubt whispered its warning, a memory of his cruelty rose to drown it. The bruises hidden beneath sleeves, the shame forced into silence, the fear etched into Amira's voice when she first told me her story. Those memories reignited my resolve, reminding me that justice demanded action, not hesitation. We began the second phase of our plan with a calculated subtlety. I introduced small disruptions into his life, each one barely noticeable on its own, but collectively powerful enough to unsettle him. A misplaced document here, a delayed message there, a conversation he thought he overheard but never quite understood. These shifts disturbed his fragile equilibrium, provoking irritation, then suspicion. And finally, the first whispers of paranoia. He began snapping at shadows, questioning the loyalty of friends, doubting the truth of his own assumptions. Watching him unravel in slow, controlled increments gave us a sense of control we had been denied for years, but it also required discipline. We needed him destabilized, not alerted. Amira played her part flawlessly. She responded to his questions with carefully measured tones, offering just enough truth to remain believable, but withholding enough to confuse him. Her silence became a mirror in which he saw only the distorted reflections of his own guilt. When he accused her of things she had not done, she allowed a flicker of fear to surface, and that slight tremor in her voice fed his growing unease. He did not understand that the fear he saw was no longer for him, but for the role she played in dismantling him. By the time he realized he could no longer trust his own instincts, the balance of power had already shifted. The documents we had uncovered remained our strongest leverage. I studied them every evening, constructing a timeline of his deceit so detailed that it revealed not only what he had done, but why and how he believed he could get away with it. The more I learned, the clearer it became that his cruelty toward us was merely an extension of a deeper corruption that had shaped every corner of his life. He was not merely violent, he was fundamentally dishonest, a man who relied on deception as naturally as others relied on breath. Bringing such a man to justice required strategy, not impulse, and each revelation sharpened my focus further. One night, as rain battered the windows, an idea came to me with such clarity that it felt almost preordained. We would not confront him directly. Confrontation offered him a chance to fight back, to twist the story as he always had. Instead, we would let his own actions expose him. The documents, the messages, the evidence of his abuse, each piece would be positioned where it would be discovered by the very people whose opinion he valued most. His reputation, carefully curated over years of lies, would crumble from the weight of the truth he had buried. And when that collapse began, he would find that the two women he thought beneath him had become the silent architects of his downfall. Amira listened as I outlined the plan, her expression shifting from fear to astonishment and finally to a quiet, steady resolve. She understood the risks, the stakes, and the necessity of flawless execution. There would be no second chances, no opportunity to correct mistakes. Every action had to be precise, every step timed with deliberate care. She placed her hand on mine then, a gesture not of comfort but of unity, and in that moment I realized that our alliance had grown into something deeper than strategy. It was survival, reclaimed dignity, and a shared determination to ensure that the cycle of cruelty ended with us. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house thickened to an almost unbearable weight. He sensed that something was amiss, yet he could not identify the source. His suspicion circled us like a predator searching for prey, but our composure remained intact. Each forced smile, each measured word, each silent glance between Amira and me concealed the storm gathering behind the facade. The more he searched for answers, the more lost he became within the labyrinth of his own paranoia. And as I watched him drift deeper into confusion, I felt the first true stirrings of justice taking shape, a quiet, deliberate force rising to meet the cruelty that had once seemed insurmountable. The final step of our plan required patience above all else. We waited for the moment when his confidence would blind him completely, when he would believe he had regained control. That moment arrived one evening as he boasted over the phone about a business deal he had manipulated through lies and intimidation. His laughter echoed through the house, harsh and careless, and I realized then that he had no idea the ground beneath him was already cracking. Amira stood beside me, her breathing steady, her posture firm. Together we listened, not as victims, but as witnesses to the final chapter of a man unaware that the truth he had tried to bury was preparing to rise and swallow everything he had built. In that moment, I understood that the end was not far, and our resolve had never been stronger. The tension between anticipation and patience grew almost unbearable as we entered the next phase. Every morning I observed him with the precision of a surgeon, noting the minutest details. How his fingers drummed on the table when frustrated, the slight shift in his posture when he lied, the way his voice faltered for a fraction of a second when confronted with inconvenient truths. These subtleties, invisible to the casual observer, became the scaffolding upon which our plan rested. Amira had become equally adept. Her once timid eyes now flickered with the awareness of every nuance, and her movements mirrored the rhythm we had silently agreed upon. Together, we created a network of observation and anticipation so precise that each of his actions seemed preordained, a puppet performing in a theater designed by two women who had once been powerless. The irony was intoxicating. The psychological warfare we waged was subtle yet devastating. We began planting deliberate inconsistencies into his perception, small details that appeared accidental, but were calculated to destabilize his confidence. A misplaced note, a rearranged document, a fleeting conversation overheard but misinterpreted, all designed to erode the certainty he relied upon. His arrogance, once his greatest weapon, now became the mechanism of his unraveling. We watched as he began questioning not only others but himself, the very foundation of his control cracking silently under the weight of suspicion we had sown. This indirect approach required extreme patience, but the promise of watching him descend into uncertainty without realizing the architects of his fate fueled our resolve. Every night, Amira and I reviewed our progress, adjusting strategies with precision. Each revelation from our surveillance brought new possibilities, new opportunities to exploit his flaws. His pattern of predictable dominance, once a terrifying force, was now a tool we wielded against him. I instructed Amira on how to respond to provocations, how to feign ignorance while collecting intelligence, how to manipulate his assumptions into a labyrinth of self-deception. Her transformation into a strategic partner was complete. She moved with a grace and confidence that mirrored my own, and together we became an unbreakable unit, synchronizing our actions with silent understanding. The balance of power had shifted, and we thrived in the quiet dominance of calculated patience. As the days stretched into weeks, we escalated our manipulation, careful never to leave traces that could expose us prematurely. His social circle began noticing subtle changes, misplaced information, altered schedules, unusual hesitations, but he dismissed them as coincidence. He could not conceive that two women he had belittled, oppressed, and broken were orchestrating a dismantling of his reality with meticulous care. I watched him from afar, noting the micro-expressions of irritation and confusion, savoring the knowledge that each step we took brought him closer to a point of inevitable confrontation with the truth. Our actions were precise, our timing flawless, and our patience inexhaustible. One evening, we executed a critical maneuver. A critical document, one that contained undeniable evidence of his manipulations and deceit, was left in a place where it could be discovered by someone whose opinion he valued. The subtlety of the placement ensured that he would remain unaware of the setup, yet it guaranteed the disruption we desired. When he encountered the evidence, the initial shock was followed by disbelief, the gap between his perception and reality widening rapidly. Every instinct that had once guided his control now betrayed him, revealing his vulnerability to the careful eyes of those who had once been his victims. The psychological impact was immediate. He recoiled inwardly, his arrogance now laced with doubt, his confidence punctured by subtle proof of exposure. Meanwhile, the bond between Amira and me strengthened further. Every shared observation, every whispered strategy, every coordinated action reinforced a connection rooted in mutual understanding and the shared pursuit of justice. Fear had been transformed into vigilance, and pain had become a sharpened instrument of clarity. Together, we operated with a silent precision that he could neither anticipate nor counter. His misjudgments, once invisible to the world, became stepping stones in a carefully constructed path toward his unraveling. Our patience, intelligence, and psychological insight became weapons far more formidable than any overt confrontation could achieve. We continued to expand the web of influence, subtly affecting his decisions and interactions. Friends, colleagues, and associates were unknowingly pulled into the intricate lattice of manipulation we had constructed. His misjudgments compounded, each error leading naturally into the next, a chain reaction of consequence that he could neither perceive nor prevent. Observing the pattern unfold was intoxicating. It reinforced the truth that control, once absolute in the hands of cruelty, could be subverted with intelligence, patience, and unyielding resolve. The anticipation of the ultimate collapse, when every carefully planted element would converge, strengthened our focus and sharpened our strategic precision. Finally, a day arrived when we sensed the first tremors of impending confrontation. His actions grew increasingly erratic. His decisions were punctuated with hesitation, his arrogance tainted with uncertainty. The trap we had woven was now poised to ensnare him completely, the carefully orchestrated sequence of observations, manipulations, and subtle disruptions reaching its critical point. Amira and I exchanged a silent glance, a tacit acknowledgement of how far we had come, and a shared understanding that the moment of reckoning was imminent. The years of oppression, fear, and silence had culminated in this meticulous orchestration, a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. The final phase would require unwavering attention and flawless execution. We had prepared for every conceivable reaction, accounted for every contingency, and aligned our actions so that his downfall would be as precise as it was inevitable. As the sun set and shadows lengthened, I felt the pulse of anticipation that had been building for months, the intoxicating certainty that the arrogance which had once oppressed us would now be the very instrument of his undoing. The storm we had cultivated in silence was about to break, and there was no force capable of halting its course. The atmosphere in the house had grown almost unbearable with the weight of anticipation. Every step he took, every conversation he forced upon himself, seemed shadowed by an unacknowledged anxiety. He could not comprehend the precision of our silence, the deliberate nature of each calculated action. Amira and I had reached a point where instinct and strategy had merged. Our observations were automatic, our plans fluid, and every small shift in his behavior was a trigger we understood instantly. The documents, the evidence, and the subtle manipulations were not merely instruments of exposure. They had become extensions of our will, silent yet inexorably guiding him toward his own undoing. I often found myself marveling at the way the arrogance he relied upon had become the very engine driving his downfall. Each day, we pushed the limits of his perception. Minor incidents were orchestrated to provoke confusion, hesitation, and doubt. A document subtly misplaced on the kitchen counter, a faint hint dropped in conversation, an innocuous question carefully worded, all designed to slowly erode his confidence. He began to second-guess every interaction, his certainty fracturing under the weight of the invisible web we had spun. Watching the cracks form was intoxicating. The man who had believed himself untouchable was now stumbling through shadows, blind to the architects of his unraveling. Even the simplest of gestures, his tapping fingers, the tight line of his mouth, betrayed him, and we read each with the precision of a clockmaker measuring milliseconds. Amira's transformation continued to astonish me. She had shed the remnants of fear entirely, replaced with a calm, analytical precision that matched my own. Her observations became more sophisticated, her reports more detailed, and her ability to anticipate his reactions grew almost intuitive. Together, we were a single entity, two minds aligned in purpose and execution. The synchronization was silent, unspoken, yet as effective as any overt confrontation. He had no idea that the women he had dominated were now the forces orchestrating the slow collapse of his carefully constructed world. Our manipulations extended beyond the confines of the house. We began influencing his social circle subtly, planting seeds of doubt about his character through interactions that appeared innocuous. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances who once admired him began to perceive inconsistencies, moments of dissonance that would later be traced back to his own arrogance and misjudgment. It was a web so intricate that he could not perceive it. The threads of his downfall were invisible to him even as they tightened around his life. Each action we took reinforced the others, a cascading series of triggers that ensured his eventual exposure was inevitable. The psychological tension escalated daily. He remained unaware of the network operating just beneath the surface, yet his behavior reflected the subtle pressure. Anxiety manifested in micro-expressions, slight stutters, and compulsive repetitions of habits that previously went unnoticed. He began questioning decisions that had always come naturally, hesitating over choices he once executed with confident certainty. Our plan, invisible yet unrelenting, was reaching its apex. Every detail had been considered, every potential response anticipated, and the alignment of events moved closer to the moment of collapse. One evening, a meeting he had scheduled with a business partner became the focal point for our plan. I had meticulously arranged for a critical piece of evidence to be placed within the partner's sight, guaranteeing exposure at the precise moment he believed himself untouchable. Amira and I coordinated timing with exacting precision, ensuring that he would be unaware of the trap until it had already sprung. The tension in the house was palpable. Every second felt stretched, charged with anticipation. We observed from separate rooms, our silent signals confirming readiness. His arrogance, which had protected him for so long, now became the mechanism by which the exposure would occur. As he entered the room, exuding the false confidence that had once intimidated both of us, I felt the culmination of months of planning, observation, and silent execution. Every detail of his routine had been anticipated. Every assumption he held was countered by our preparation. The partner's reaction, carefully guided by the placement of evidence and subtle suggestion, mirrored exactly the outcome we had predicted. Shock, confusion, and disbelief rippled across the table. He attempted to assert control, but the web of manipulations we had spun left him trapped in his own misjudgments. Each gesture, each faltering word, each glance of doubt confirmed that our plan was working with a precision only matched by the intensity of our resolve. In that moment, I saw the first real cracks of defeat etch themselves across his expression. He had underestimated the intelligence, patience, and strategic acumen of the women he had oppressed. Our patience, our silence, and our calculated actions had rendered him powerless. Amira, standing beside me, exuded the same quiet strength I had cultivated over the long months of planning. Together, we had become the force he could not predict, the reckoning he could not escape. The layers of his arrogance, cruelty, and manipulation were now laid bare, vulnerable to the consequences he had long believed would never touch him. And yet, as the room quivered with tension, I realized that this was still only the beginning. The emotional weight, the psychological exposure, and the meticulous orchestration of events had achieved a critical threshold, but the ultimate act of justice, the one that would ensure his total downfall, was still ahead. Months of preparation, patience, and strategy had led to this moment of fracture, and now the final pieces had to be placed with surgical precision. The reckoning would be absolute, inescapable, and devastating, a culmination of every act of cruelty he had committed and every moment of silence we had endured. The storm we had nurtured in shadows was poised to break fully, and there was no force capable of halting its course. The day had arrived when the culmination of months of planning, observation, and psychological manipulation would unfold. The air was thick with anticipation, each heartbeat echoing with the knowledge that the arrogance which had once dominated our lives was about to collapse under the weight of its own deception. I moved silently through the house, Amira at my side, our movements synchronized, every gesture calculated, every glance deliberate. The evidence we had gathered, the subtle manipulations we had orchestrated, the networks of observation we had established, all of it converged in this precise moment. There was no turning back. The storm we had cultivated in silence was poised to break, and the consequences would be irreversible. I watched him, oblivious to the intricate web of exposure surrounding him, striding through the house with the same careless confidence he had always carried. He believed he had mastered every aspect of control, that every relationship, every interaction, every shadow of doubt was under his command. But he was blind to the fact that every move he made had been anticipated, every reaction measured, every lie and manipulation mapped and countered. The arrogance he had wielded as a weapon had now become his prison, each step he took unknowingly guiding him toward the inevitable reckoning. The intensity of the moment was almost unbearable, yet I remained composed, channeling every ounce of emotion, every shred of past pain, into the precision of action. Amira, standing beside me, exuded a quiet, controlled strength that mirrored my own. Together, we had transformed fear into strategy, pain into foresight, and oppression into calculated power. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, communicating a shared understanding that no words could convey. This was the apex of our plan, the moment when every carefully orchestrated detail would converge to reveal the truth and dismantle the man who had once wielded cruelty as though it were a divine right. We moved with deliberate subtlety, placing documents and evidence where they would be discovered by those whose perception mattered most, ensuring that the exposure would be both public and undeniable. The first cracks appeared almost imperceptibly. A glance, a hesitated word, a micro-expression of disbelief. These were the signals that the carefully maintained illusion of control was beginning to fracture. He attempted to assert authority, to mask the growing tension with the same arrogance that had served him for years. Yet every effort only highlighted the instability he had long ignored. We observed, silent and patient, letting the process unfold according to the blueprint we had meticulously constructed. Each step he took, each reaction he made, confirmed that our strategy was succeeding with precision. As the evidence began to surface in the right places, the atmosphere shifted completely. Friends, colleagues, and associates who had previously admired him now recoiled in shock and disbelief. Conversations once filled with admiration became laden with doubt and caution. The reputation he had so carefully cultivated began to crumble, layer by layer, exposing not only the acts of cruelty toward us, but the deeper manipulations that had permeated every aspect of his life. He could not comprehend the speed or accuracy with which his world was unraveling. The trap we had built was invisible, yet inescapable. His arrogance, the very trait that had allowed him to dominate and oppress, now accelerated his downfall. Each attempt to assert control, to lie, or to deflect suspicion only deepened the fractures we had engineered. The psychological collapse was visible in subtle tremors of expression, hesitation in speech, and an overarching sense of disorientation. He had become a man caught in the architecture of his own misdeeds, a prisoner to the meticulous orchestration of the two women he had once believed powerless. The slow, deliberate dismantling of his world was reaching its apex, and there was nothing he could do to regain control. I felt a surge of clarity as the final elements fell into place. The years of oppression, the silence forced upon us, and the pain endured had been transformed into a calculated, unstoppable force. Amira and I watched in unison as the consequences we had orchestrated swept through his life, each reaction affirming the precision of our strategy. There was a profound satisfaction in knowing that every measure had been taken with deliberate care, every risk calculated, and every outcome anticipated. The man who had once believed he could bend the world to his will was now helpless against the force of truth and retribution we had conjured from the shadows. By evening, the collapse was undeniable. The social, professional, and personal pillars he had relied upon crumbled, leaving him exposed, isolated, and powerless. He stumbled through interactions, flustered and bewildered, while the evidence of his deceit and cruelty spread in plain sight. Friends and associates confronted him, and even his carefully chosen allies hesitated, unsure of where loyalty lay. The psychological unraveling was complete, arrogance had failed, and control had vanished. Amira and I observed with quiet triumph, the culmination of months of meticulous planning and patience realized in the stark clarity of this moment. As night descended, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what had been accomplished. The years of fear, pain, and subjugation were replaced with an unshakable sense of justice. Amira stood beside me, the silent witness to the final execution of our plan, and for the first time in months, both of us breathed freely, unburdened by the past. The man who had caused such suffering was no longer a threat, his power dissolved, his influence shattered. The storm we had conjured in silence had reached its apex, leaving only the clarity of resolution and the quiet triumph of calculated retribution. And as the house settled into an almost sacred stillness, I realized that vengeance, when executed with patience, precision, and intelligence, could transform the shattered remnants of fear into the unassailable fortress of justice. The years of silence had ended, and with them, the reign of cruelty. We had risen from the shadows, meticulous and unyielding, to ensure that the man who had once believed himself untouchable was reduced to nothing more than a cautionary memory, a testament to the power of resilience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. In the quiet aftermath, as Amira and I looked at each other, we understood that this was not the end of pain, but the absolute end of oppression, and that knowledge alone was victory enough.